Robert Bury, the Town Supervisor of Germantown. Thank you very much for coming here today to this very special occasion, the Town Hall, hosted by Congressman Antonio Delgado. Before we begin, please join us and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Now, before we begin, please, a note about safety. Please familiarize yourselves with your surroundings. The exits are behind you and to your left. On that note, and without further ado, Congressman Antonio Delgado.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you so much. This is a nice turnout. Very nice. Really appreciate all of you coming out. I believe I was told the mayor from Hudson is here as well. I want to acknowledge him. Mayor Rector, thank you for coming. And I want to thank each, yes, thank you. I want to thank all of you for coming. This is the fourth town hall that we're hosting. Before I get into a little bit of what's been going on, as we all know, a lot has been going on in DC. I want to just first express to you how much this means to me and to us as a community. And by this, I mean town halls. I mean engagement. I mean you have an opportunity and we have an opportunity to speak with each other and to listen collectively to each other and hear each other out from different points of view. As I learned in DC, the partisanship is beyond the pale. And our system is broken. And there's no doubt about it. And it's up to us. It's up to communities like this. It's up to districts like this one that are actually purple. We have a third Democrat, a third Independent, a third Republican. It's up to these kinds of places to be the example. Because when I go to DC, I don't think about what party I'm affiliated with. I think about the community that I represent. And I have my principles and I have my set of values and those guide me. But at the end of the day, I'm thinking about how do I advocate for each and every single person, family in this room. And we get a lot more of that right now in DC, a whole lot more. Now I'm going to spend a little bit of time because I've got a lot of people here and I want to take as many questions as we can. So I'm not going to sit here and just filibuster and talk a whole lot. I am, though, going to run through a little bit about what's been happening in my first month. Where we are coming out of the shutdown, the President's recent declaration for a national emergency, my thoughts on that, our legislative accomplishments today, and priorities moving forward, and of course the work we're doing here at home across the district, whether it's town halls or setting up offices to make sure that I'm accessible to each and every one of you. Now, the shutdown, no question that it was quite an abnormal, unusual experience for me as a first-term member to walk in to the halls of Congress and be greeted by the longest shutdown in this country's history. It's an eerie feeling to have to try to navigate in those waters. I struggled to figure out how I could do the job in a way that could connect me back home to the folks. And my answer over time was clear: to go home and stay connected and listen and to meet with the federal workers who were being asked to work without pay, to meet with the farmers who were holding out hope to make sure they get their reimbursements from all the programs they're relying on the Department of Ag, to meet with small business owners who are also worried about the economy contracting over a shutdown that was irresponsible and caused way too much harm for way too long. I introduced legislation asking the CBO during that time to issue daily reports on the economic impact of the shutdown, hoping it might spur some action. I, after consulting with my wife, decided I'm not going to take a check until the shutdown is over to demonstrate solidarity with the community. I went to the Coast Guard and Saugerties and met with the fine men there. Armed services, first time in this country's history where members of the armed services were not receiving pay during a government lapse. Met with them, heard their stories. did the work, wrote letters to various administrations or agencies asking for action, asking for answers, and of course voted countless times to open up the government on a bipartisan basis. Now here we are, after weeks and weeks later, and we get a deal. Now before even the deal was struck, I, along with about 23 or 4 other Democratic colleagues, wrote the speaker and encouraged and urged her to say, listen, let's just have a vote on the floor. Let's have an open hearing. Let's let all the different dynamics play out. Let's hear all different experts speak to what we should do along the border, and then have a vote. Well, a day later, and I'm not saying my letter was the reason why, but a day later, we get to a place where we have the appropriators get in a room and begin to negotiate a bipartisan deal. At the end of the day, it was bipartisan. 87 House Republicans voted for it, 213 Democrats in the House voted for it, 87 members of the Senate voted for it. It was a veto-proof agreement. Veto-proof. So when we talk about the president having to sign it, he didn't really have to be honest. It was veto-proof. I'm happy he did, because he wanted all the bodies, all the branches to work collaboratively in this endeavor. $1.4 billion, 55 miles of security, no wall, but fencing, right? Enhanced technology, screening along our ports. 90% of all the drugs come through our ports. It's important that we do that. Funding for alternatives to detention. Funding for processing asylum claims in the courts. Some good stuff in there. You know, not all perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But we're talking about 7 agencies: the Department of Ag, Department of Commerce, Treasury Department, Interior Department. A lot of funding for rural ag, a lot of funding for economic development, SNAP, HUD, all this getting funding through this agreement. So it's a very important piece to get done and move forward. And we did it. And we'll move forward. But on the heels of that, I would be irresponsible of me to not say, I'm very disturbed by the President's decision to move forward with declaring a national emergency. There's simply, in my estimation, no basis for it. The fact of the matter is, the Congress has spoken. We have the power of the purse, Article 1 of the Constitution. We made it clear where we should be appropriating funds for the purposes of securing our borders. It was done. No point in our country's history has the executive branch thought it warranted to do an end around what Congress has sole authority to facilitate in order to fulfill a campaign promise. And so here we are, lurching in a way that is undemocratic and a threat, I would argue, to our separation of powers and checks and balances. And I will continue to speak out against this and sign on any legislation that calls that for what it is. On the second piece, now, you would think that all that could keep somebody busy, and it has. But I didn't come to D.C. to play all the nonsense that, honestly, a lot of that is. It's an unfortunate reality, this partisanship. I came to D.C. to serve and figure out how to help this community. I came with priorities, from rural broadband access, to dealing with water contamination issues, to economic development, infrastructure, to fighting for expanding health care and improving our environment, dealing with climate change. These are the things that I came to Congress to do. And I got busy doing that. My first bill is, in fact, a bipartisan bill that I introduced that extends benefits to the spouses of service-disabled veterans. That was the very first bill that I introduced. I originally co-sponsored H.R. 1, a massive historic government reform bill that gives our government back to the people and takes it away from all the special interest groups and all of the individuals who are currently in Congress who are acting out of self-interest. Enough with our districts being drawn by elected officials, independent commissions that allow us to have true districts that, guess what, look like ours, that are purple and not super red or super blue, and create no opportunity for cooperation. Very important. I introduced a standalone bill as a part of that called the CLEAR Act. And if you look it up, The FEC report, you see donors that come in, you don't know if they're lobbyists. Well, this act will make sure that lobbyist is identified on the FEC report, so we know who's giving to who. We all know the story, and if we don't, they'll prevent Sevier County with Michael Hickey's father in Hoosick Falls and the PFAS contamination issues for my State of the Union. I brought Mr. Hickey with me as my guest to highlight the need for the EPA to set a maximum limit on this chemical that is wreaking havoc in our communities right here at home. And we're going to continue to do that fight. I joined the PFAS bipartisan caucus to make sure that we continue to do that work. Another piece that I'm super focused on as we move forward. I've also signed on to the Paid Family Leave Act. I've signed on to universal background checks. I've signed on to do away with the SALT cap. You guys hear me? He's breaking up. Did you catch that SALT cap one? Very important. Okay, I signed on to the SALT cap. We've been busy. We've been very busy. And I don't want to keep going on and on. I want to wrap this up. But I want you to understand that I'm here to do the work. I'm here to find common ground. You know, a lot of talk out there about how to protect the environment and all the politics around that. Well, we introduced or plan to introduce a resolution that asks the Department of Energy to study how we create more green jobs and a pilot program to make sure that our community college can retrain workers for a real green economy moving forward. Those are the kind of concrete ideas that I want to present that are grounded in facts and not in all of the hoopla that we hear and all the headlines that we read day in and day out. Now, in conclusion, we can have a nice conversation here. We have got to get back to a point here where we can have honest dialogue and disagree, but do so agreeably. You know, we got to, for the sake of our young people, for the sake of our democracy. You know, I've had 3 town halls now, and I've had exchanges with a lot of folks. We don't always agree, but I try to be respectful. And I try to be honest and open and accountable at every exchange. And I would hope that at the very least, that's what we can all expect from each other. As citizens, you know, all here, together, trying to figure out how to move forward and deal with some pretty complicated issues. So I'm excited to be here. We've opened up an office in Kingston, opened up an office out in Delhi in Delaware. We're opening up an office in Oneonta and Otsego. We're looking at space in Hudson, and we're looking at, yes, and we're looking at space in Sullivan County. By my count, that's 5. That's 5 offices. We're doing 6 town halls in the upcoming week. I'm visiting a number of farms. We're calling this Ag Week all throughout this week. I'm here to work, and I'm here to serve you. With that, let's open up for questions. And now, it's fair game. I just ask that you actually ask a question. When you stand up, like you should have a question at the end of it. And then we can just have a nice conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for coming here, and thanks for communicating with us. My big concern is the violation of international human rights law. The violation of international human rights law at the border with incarcerating people who are seeking asylum, family separations. I don't think it's an overstatement that I feel like, you know, I'm living in 1933 Germany and going about my day while this horrendous policy is being implemented in our names. And I'd like to know what you're doing about that.
So the question was about, to be clear, I want to make sure that I'm stating this correct. I think the policy has ended, but I understand your concern. The criminalization of asylum seekers attempting to seek asylum, and the separation of families along the border and what's being done to prevent that and continue to investigate the outcome. Obviously, as we know, there are still a lot of families who have not been reunited. That policy, this is my understanding, is no longer being implemented. That doesn't mean that the effects of that policy are not still playing themselves out and manifesting themselves. And it also doesn't mean that there should be oversight and an investigation into how that happened and how it can be prevented moving forward. And there are committees on the Oversight Committee, who can actually do that work, and I would support any work that goes into that. I think the funding that we have put forth in the deal, that goes into the processing claims, and goes into expanding the courts for that very purpose could also be helpful in that regard. Listen, there's no doubt that the fact that we find ourselves even in this place is about as hurtful and harmful to the soul of this country as one could imagine. It's not who we are. And it's imperative that we have moral voices step up and speak with authority on this issue. And so yes, I'm signed up to do whatever I can through the committees, to do the work, to speak out. And yes, if it were to happen again, which I don't think it would, but if it were to happen again, to continue to resist any such behavior. Does that get to your question?
Can I just ask
Yeah, go
one
ahead.
follow-up? I'm concerned, I appreciate what you said, but there's still, it may not be in effect, I don't know if that's true or not, but
Well, the president said he would no longer be implementing that policy.
But
You went on record to say
we
that.
have tent cities of migrants, some of whom are seeking asylum. There are people waiting in Mexico, but the thing I wanted to address was, what about the thousands of children who are farmed out, separated from their parents?
Yeah, we have to make sure.
I'm concerned that they're going to be adopted out.
Yeah, no. And we have to reunite those children. And I don't know how that's why the investigation is absolutely warranted, to figure out what is being done, what resources are being put in place to make sure that we can reunite these families. Absolutely. And that's why it's important to have individuals in power on these committees who will prioritize that type of seeking out that information. So that's something that's a priority of the Democrats for sure. It's something that our committees will be looking into, and it's something that we have to get to the bottom of. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes.
You mentioned something about caregiving for the veterans.
Yes.
Is there a bill for that, like for spouses who care for their sick veterans?
Yeah, so the bill that I referenced, she's asking about caregiving for the veterans. The bill that I'm talking about was a bill, it's a service-disabled bill for spouses of service-disabled veterans. At the time, before the bill was introduced, only certain spouses could receive the benefits if your now deceased spouse or veteran had 100% disability. So if you had 80% or 70%, you weren't entitled to get those benefits. And the benefits were access to, opportunities through the VA, small business opportunities through the VA. That didn't make sense to us. And I thought it was important to make sure that we actually extend those benefits to any disabled veteran, right? The other piece is the child care piece. There was a bill recently introduced, a bipartisan bill that I just introduced along with Elisa Stefani, that speaks to providing child care to veterans who are in need when they are going to seek mental health issues, whether it's scheduled appointments or not. And in fact, I introduced an amendment to that bill, the first amendment that I've introduced and debated on the floor, that said not just for scheduled or regular appointments, but for emergencies. So when an individual somehow or some way gets struck or gets in a panic, with PTSD or needs some help, they should have to also think about, how am I going to pay for my child's care, right? So we actually introduced legislation and amended it to make sure that in the event a veteran needs to get mental health services, they don't have to worry about making sure their child has care under no such circumstances, whether it's emergency or regular or normal hours, it doesn't matter. So that's the work that we've been doing in this space.
I just was wondering, is it part of the money that the veteran gets, or is it part of, is it extra, like for caregiving itself? Like a lot of the veterans' wives, they care for the veterans, and it takes a lot of time.
Yeah, that care would be compensated. The care would be compensated.
Oh, okay, I just wanted to.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
There is something called aid in attendance for the veterans.
Okay.
I've been dealing with the VA system for over 20 years. Gary Flattery wasn't able to make it. He's the VSO for Columbia County.
Okay.
Does a lot for the veterans. I had just hooked up with Nick. I'm having a problem myself with they wanted one form from me and took away a portion of my disability after having 44 surgeries. So what needs to be looked at is the time of decisions. Like, you as a congressman, you have a direct line to the regional offices. There is a congressional liaison that I talk about, and because I have dealt with that, for years, that you can get in, and some of these cases are now going 530 something days now. I myself, 2 months, I've lost $3,000 to take care of my family. I've lost health care for my children. So something like this is trying to find out how to, they have the paperwork, it's just now they have a call center. You used to be able to call the regional office and say, listen, I have the paperwork in, you have all the evidence, this needs to be changed now.
Right.
And it's not that way anymore. We're a call center, you can't get to these places anymore as a private citizen, which we used to be able to do. So that's where we have to call on you and say, Congressman, I have all the evidence in place. Can somebody call the regional office and get this, changed over?
Right.
But like I said, people that they get denied, so they have to
Go through the whole process again. I get it. It gets pushed
right.
aside.
So, but the days now are going from up to 530 something. How does somebody take care of their family?
No, you're absolutely right. And to me, what you're speaking to, sir, I'm sorry, can you tell me your name again?
Steve Pachessa.
Steve, thank you, Steve. I really appreciate, everything you're bringing to the table, looking for your service, all of it. And, one of the things that blows my mind, is how we continue to be so willing to send our men and women overseas, put them in harm's way, and rightfully so be proud for all that we've been able to do through their sacrifice, through your sacrifice. And then when it comes time to welcome you home and do right by you and make sure you have what you need, given all that you've sacrificed and your family has sacrificed, where's the warm hand back? Where's it back? And all we have seen now is a trend away from that. When people talk about privatization, at a certain point, there's a role to play here to make sure that those who are out there on the front lines defending the welfare and the safety of this country of ours are protected here at home and providing help when they're coming back. And making them have to go through 16, 18 different channels, treating it as if it's an insurance claim, saying to figure out how many points to qualify for something and then prove it 3 or 4 times over just to get heard. It's ridiculous. And so when you hear this talk about we got to have more privatization, and no, what we need to do is put more investment in the VA. Put more investment in it. So I'm with you. And I have a Veterans Advisory Board that we put together. I want to make sure that I can do everything in my power to be a voice and to be an advocate. A number of the bills that I've already introduced, I think 3 of them now, are in the veterans space. We just introduced the Blue Water Act for Vietnam vets exposed to Agent Orange. Right, so I'm on it, man. And whatever we can do to help and continue to push this thing through and get away from this trend that's making it more and more complicated for those who sacrifice so much for this country to get the help that they need, we have to change that dynamic.
And the VA doesn't always make everything transparent.
No, and I'm not saying the VA is perfect, but it would help if we help the VA.
Just to bring up a case, somebody had come to Gary and said that 2 of the family members hadn't been in Vietnam, and put in for Agent Orange, and they died during their claim.
It takes
The
a long
VA told them that the claim dies with them, and that is not the truth.
Right.
I researched it. I'm kind of like a nut when it comes to that. But I researched it and I found out there's something called a substitute claimant.
Right.
And the spouse, family member can pick up that claim and get what that veteran deserves.
And we're going to do that kind of work. We have a great team here on the ground. You know, Amanda Boomhouse is here. You know, we have Nick here as well. Is Nick here? Yeah, so we have a team of folks here who are going to be accessible and make sure that we can follow every single possible pathway to get what you need, to get you what you need.
And we'd also like to have you do some veteran events. I'm becoming commander of Ghent Post 5933 VFW.
All right.
And we'd like to have you up
Send
there.
me the invite, man. Send me the invite. Thank you so much. We're going to go way in the back. The gentleman right there with the white shirt on. Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me down there?
I can hear you.
All right, great. You mentioned during your speech that you are looking for ways to support green jobs and pilot programs. And on that note, I was actually at your office in Kingston earlier this week at a rally, and for the Green New Deal. And will you back the Green New Deal that's been proposed as a resolution?
Great question.
Yes. I don't make it a habit to support things that I don't necessarily have a full grasp of. I spoke about this idea before it became what it is today during the election. Talked about the need for bold change. Talked about the need to make sure we do things dramatically that reduce carbon emissions. Talked about the need to shift away from propping up the fossil fuel industry to empower and incentivize investment in renewable energy. Talked about water infrastructure. Talked about creative ways in the ag space to reduce carbon and figure out how to bring all these pieces together. The problem I have with a lot of this conversation, particularly on this issue, is we are now living in a time where we live in headlines. And when you put something out there and it's not clear what it actually is in this environment, people put in whatever they want. And then they just throw it on you and say, he believes that too. I'd rather tell you what I'm for and what I'm going to do to get there than just say, I'm for something that in this climate can mean anything. And here's what I mean by that. How about when you read articles that talk about no airplanes, or no cows, or people unwilling to work? I mean, these are the headlines that are out there. And I'm not saying that that's part of the program. I'm just telling you that our politics are such now in this world where you can't have a substantive debate. So I am for the select committee piece of the deal. I am for the call to action. I am for making sure that we work our behinds off and do everything we can to reduce carbon emissions and actually propose things that will get us there. I am for making sure that we invest in green jobs, which is why I'm introducing legislation asking the Department of Energy to do a study that it hasn't done in 10 years on what are green jobs out there, how they look. Are they just in the renewable energy space? Or are they actually in the water infrastructure space? Are they in the farming space? Can we get a real look at what the green economy might be in 10, 15, 20 years? That could be helpful. Concrete, practical, pragmatic steps towards a bold vision. That is what I think.
That's partly my question, but it is very concerning to not be part of, just not to see your name absent from a community of people who are moving forward. What, to me, I read every word of the resolution, seems like it lays out the tenets that you got elected on, that we all worked with you to get you elected. It's a very important message to send to the communities here who are being impacted by climate change. We're a coastal community in Germantown and all along the Hudson River. We're an ag community. All these things are negatively impacting our future and our children's future. I want to know whose interests you're representing and staying away from signing on to that resolution.
I just told you, now I have to explain it again. You know whose interest I'm trying to stay away from?
Misinterpreted by conservatives. It seems like
Or anybody. It's not about conservatives, it's about my set of principles and how I think I can best reflect and pursue the interests of this district. Because at the end of the day, and I hear you, and I understand where you're coming from. I do. I understand where you're coming from. This takes us back, if you will, right? And this is the kind of person I am on this one, okay? This takes us back to the whole Medicare for all public option debate, right? So I'll tell you who I am, what I'm about. Okay, I'm consistent at every turn. Okay, I'm not looking for the headline that just encapsulates the emotion of the moment. It's not how I orient myself in this space. I appreciate that space. It's an important space. But I believe that my set of skills, my set of experiences, the makeup of this district and all of its diverse constituents requires the sort of leadership that seeks a way to have these conversations that brings us together for the purpose of a bold change that is, in fact, achievable in the short term. Now. Not what we want 15, 20, 30 years from now, but what we can actually get done right now. And we can't, on the one hand, talk about how divided and how partisan and how ugly and how broken the system is, on the one hand, and then turn right around and say, we can just get all these things done on the other hand. It can't be both things. If it's that divisive and it's that partisan and it's that ugly and it's that chaotic, well, how are we going to fix it? How?
Those alliances send
it
messages.
seems like starting with a guiding document that lays out
next
vision
question.
allows for those small and immediate steps to be better taken because we understand the vision that we're in.
This is- I was-
Can you, can't hear that, can you repeat it?
As someone who spends a lot of time with young people, we want to see this kind of action be moved forward. I want to see your name voting for that resolution. And I'm just going to put it on record so you know that.
Yeah.
I certainly appreciate you, and I hear you loud and clear. Loud and clear. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, Congressman. I'm here with my family, which is interracial and Jewish. And we've been having some problems in the school system. A very dear friend of mine has pulled 2 of her daughters out of the Rondout Valley Middle School and High School for anti-Semitic incidents, overt anti-Semitic incidents. And she was met by the school administration with, these are children from nice families, the nice families thing. And when they reopened the case of what had happened with the superintendent's office, they watched video of what the girl reported happened on the bus, being called Anne Frank, goose-stepping, overt anti-Semitism.
Wow.
It was all shown with audio to have happened. The child admitted it was suspended for 5 days. And then the school kind of dropped it. The staff didn't know anything had happened. The kids were chanting to free the boy who had been suspended to the girl in class. The staff didn't even know what was going on. The parents felt unsafe. They really got an ambivalent response, and they pulled their students out. My interracial family has experienced this culture of the upperclassmen in the school using the N-word sort of socially in the hip-hop way, but it's all white children doing it. And when my family member expressed that she was offended by the N-word being thrown around in that sort of casual way, that was met with, kind of too bad, with this what we do. And there's just a sort of general in our purple and agricultural community, we have those conflicts as a sort of microcosm of the nation because we are a purple community. We have these deep-seated sort of let it be, and then we have what are we going to do to change things to accept people who look different and worship differently, especially after Tree of Life and the shooting culture, and people pulling their children because they don't feel safe in the schools. I would love to know what you can do to help. I don't want anything bad to happen even to these children who are just doing what they do, what they learn in their homes. I want education. I want cultural education for these kids to grow up and make a better world for my family.
Absolutely. So, yeah, after that. So, I'm African American. My wife is African American and Jewish. We are raising our little boys. You're Jewish. So this is a personal piece. I hear you loud and clear on this. I also point out that I'm African American because, as an African American, I'm the first to represent upstate New York. In the district, I might tell you, as I'm sure most of you know, it's about 90% white. 90. The third most rural district of any Democrat in Congress. That's what I'm representing as an African American. The third most rural. The eighth most in the entire body of Congress. And for those who paid attention in last year's campaign, we know that there were some things that were ugly and divisive. And through it all, the community decided to vote and do so in a way that they thought, separate and apart from all that, was going to be able to advance our shared values. So I have a personal hope that is grounded in my own set of experiences about what is possible when we actually believe in ourselves and believe in our community and stand up for our values and our principles and do so steadfastly. There's no doubt that there are individuals right now who sit in the highest seats in the land who are amplifying messages and who are amplifying themes that are bringing back to the surface of this country notions of hate and divisiveness. And these are the kind of things, I might say, that this country has spent its entire existence trying to overcome. That is the essence of this country. That's what makes this country special. It's that commitment to overcoming its deep flaws. Flaws that also were at the origin story, within the origin story of this very country. Right? So, it's important to have the long view when we're in these situations and understand what we've been able to overcome. You know, I don't have to think that far back to know what my parents and their parents had to overcome for me to be standing in front of you today. So, while I hear you and I think it's important, I just encourage you to always first go back to yourself and to your family and to your community. And I will do everything in my power to speak out against the hate, to speak out against any sort of behavior that diminishes the story of this country, that diminishes our commitment to equality for all. We are not all the way there. We've got a long way to go. And for the first time, I think, in a long time, we feel like we're actually going in the wrong direction on this critical narrative of who we are. So now is the time to actually have that moral leadership, not just the political stuff, the moral clarity to speak about our equality, the fact that we're all in this together, and that our dignity lies in our shared humanity. That's it. Not in our race, not in our class, not in our religion, not in our sexual orientation, but in our shared dignity and shared humanity. That's where it lies. And so I'm with you on this, and I will do everything, whether it's the Equality Act, whether it's making sure we have racial bias training, whether it's making sure that we educate our kids in the classroom, and as you put it, make sure that our curriculum is more culturally reflective of the needs of the future, that brings us all together as a community. These are all critically important steps as we move forward. Absolutely.
I support your call for the study of the demand for green jobs. Yet 81% of likely voters support the Green New Deal, 96% Democrats, and almost 70% Republicans. And this is not the emotion of the moment. My whole life, I've been grown up with the fear for my future in this country, and for the fact that I won't be able to do basic things like you can do now, like raising my own family and my children in this country. And the Green New Deal does have a very clear, laid out path to moving to renewable energies and off of fossil fuels by 2030. And that is the only acceptable and the only acceptable way and the only way that we can solve the climate crisis, which is the greatest crisis that humanity faces today. And it is the only thing that we can do right now to solve this problem. So what will it take for you to support the Green New Deal that all of us in this room demand? And what will it take for you to take bold leadership? What will it take for you to take bold leadership on this issue in Washington? If it's not the Green New Deal, something that will solve this crisis.
So the question was, again, about the Green New Deal. And I think the reason why there was a response that you got was because the way it was framed. When we say it's the only thing that can happen, and listen, I don't want to diminish the severity of the problem. It is a crisis. And when you think about what the president just did, one can make an argument down the road, he just set a precedent for someone else to claim that what we're going through right now, which I'd argue is a lot more a crisis. That. So, but the notion that it's the only way, the notion that it is abundantly clear, these are things that are not that clear to me. And I think to a fair amount of people. And so, and I think it's important, and I respect your point of view. I think it's important that we have these conversations in a way that we at least can land on what the specific things I can do to get there. Like, what are the concrete steps that I'll vote for to actually move the ball forward, to get carbon emissions down, to shift away from the fossil fuel industry? What are the concrete steps? And I think, to me, if you can actually go through those steps, and you actually have a clear sense of who will vote for what and when, you have a real sense of that person's commitment to addressing the problem. And again, as we talked about in this climate, I feel that I'm doing right by this community as a whole by focusing, laser-like focused, on those concrete things that I can do, that I know are going to achieve. Get to the end. We share the same vision. We share the same goals here. You have your sense of what you think is the best approach to get there. I have a sense as well. But we're on the same team here. You know, I have a commitment to making sure that we unlock what is the climate change crisis and move and develop an actual green economy. Absolutely. Yes.
Hi. Well, I've got a practical thing that you can do. And I
Good. Give it to me.
I actually agree with you. It's only a resolution. It is not a series of laws. So what we need to do is get forward a series of laws. A resolution is not binding. So I support you in you're trying to decide and going through this on this, Antonio, and I thank you for everything else. What I would like you to do is to please investigate the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, who is constantly allowing projects to go through
I'm with you on
from the industry. I've got all kinds of...
The stats are ridiculous. They allow those pipes to just be built without any real oversight. I hear you.
And one thing that people don't understand is that it is the industry, that the FERC demands that the industry pays for them to investigate them. So we've got this whole fox in the hen house kind of thing going on. We've got all kinds of, and people having eminent domain forced on them, when so much of what the energy the pipeline is putting through is going to international markets and will continue to go to more and more international markets. So eminent domain is only supposed to serve the people of this country. They take things by eminent domain because it's the best of the people of this country. So I'm asking you if you will urge Congress to hold hearings to investigate and take necessary steps to halt this harm, and to gather fellow legislators to help you with this effort. I urge you to oppose any legislation that opposes us to diminish the rights of states, counties, and municipalities to have a role in pipeline reviews, approvals, and/or permitting.
I'm on board with that.
I have a whole list and all kinds of.
I like your list. I like your list. I like your list a lot. You know, listen.
I have it for people who want to see it. I have extra copies so that they can. Protect property owners. I have this from the Niskanen.
I'm gonna take it all, and I'm gonna look at it all. These are the kind of things that I get excited about because it's about the work. It's about legislation. It's about doing the actual work and getting into details and getting in the weeds and figuring out what we can do legislatively to advance the ball here. So all of those things I'm gonna look into. A lot of those things you said, I'm on board with. So we're in line here.
Thank you.
We're in line. You, sir.
I'm talking about macroeconomics.
Macroeconomics, all right.
In the last 8 years of the Obama administration, how the deficit is growing and mortgaging our children's and grandchildren's future. Now we have a situation that has accelerated this deficit. What could you do to bring that back into the forefront of discussion after 8 years of Republicans banging away that this is a problem?
Such an important question. I just want to clap just for the question. $22 trillion. The national debt, the highest in this country's history. $20 trillion is what we started at in 2016. 2 years later, $2 trillion added more to our national debt. By projections, 2029 will be at $29 trillion. We are adding about, over the next 10 years, $1 trillion worth of deficit. Annual basis. Annual basis. It's disgraceful. And we are bankrupting, our young people who are thinking about how do we invest, how do we actually do the work to have jobs, to protect our environment, to educate our young people. How do we do it with all this debt? Now some folks might say, well, we can print money, it doesn't matter. Wrong. Wrong. Now, I want to be clear, this is an important piece. We can print money, we can. But here's the interesting thing to always keep in mind. The ratio of debt to our GDP. Because if our ratio to debt to GDP is where it is now, where it's 98% of debt makes up our GDP. It was just 73% 2 years ago. We're at levels now that haven't been seen since post-World War II in terms of that ratio. And why is that ratio so important? Because if you spend in a way that grows the GDP, that grows the economy faster than the debt levels, well, what can you do? You can start paying off your debt. The cost of capital actually goes down when you actually seek loans from the rest of the world because they're seeing the economy grow. You are okay with the inflation piece. So the key is, what can we do to bring down the debt and make sure that we are investing in a way that grows the economy faster than how much debt we take in?
Yes.
That's the key. A couple of ways, not that complicated. One, increase revenue, right? Increase revenue. Two, spend more. In a way, within that spending piece, cut spending where we think it's appropriate. Now, revenue piece. Where we went wrong was that tax bill. The tax bill added $1.5 trillion to our deficit. Just like that. Lowered the top marginal rates when inequality is at an all-time high. 80% of folks own just 20% of the wealth. That's it. We're giving tax breaks to the wealthiest amongst us. Don't get it. Don't get it. Corporations are paying on average about 18% in their tax rate. Before the 35% drop, the 15% drop, we gave it to them anyway, with no strings attached. And they didn't use that money for increased wages or increased jobs. They didn't. They used it to pay off stocks, dividends, buybacks. That's all it went to. So, what would be a more appropriate step? Well, how about making sure we close corporate loopholes? How about we actually make sure that we have taxes that reflect a progressive system, that make sure that folks pay more for what they earn? How about we actually revisit the carried interest loophole, which allows hedge fund managers to get taxed at a rate significantly lower than the folks who sit in front of their office and are their assistants. Get taxed 20% less. It doesn't make any sense. So there is real progressive tax reform that we can make that I would point out, and I want to be clear about this, that should be focusing on the big boys, the big corporations, not the small businesses, who oftentimes get lumped into the mix here, right? There's some pieces to the tax bill that I think are helpful for small businesses. Writing off 100%, right, their expenditures in the first year, that's a good thing. It's a good thing. So there are pieces within the bill that are good for small businesses. So I'm not saying just want to steamroll over everybody. But when we have all this inequality, it's a problem. Spending. If we spend in infrastructure, $1 gives us $1.80 back in infrastructure. $1.80 back. So we're returning on our investment, ROI. You invest, you get something back. We're not investing anything right now. And the economy's staying put. It's hot, but hot for who? Right? It's not hot for the future. Right? It's not hot for the future. And so it's important that we actually spend the money with that revenue we just created, right, in our roads, in our rail, in broadband, in cell service, in our schools, in green jobs. And that is how you grow. And then, yes, ultimately, you got to start figuring out where you're going to cut. Where you're going to cut. Because we got a big bloated government. And it gets in the way a lot of times. Well, listen, I'm all for making sure that we have safe and secure all across the world, that we make sure we project our values and be the moral compass we want to be and project our values. Not just our might, but our values. And when the Pentagon issues a study that finds that the DOD has about, $220-something billion in administrative waste on an annual basis, a quarter of the overall budget. It's a lot of waste. That's a lot of waste. So we could be doing that type of dissecting when it comes across all of our components of the government. Where's all this waste? And how do we rein it in? Spend where appropriate. Spend smart. Spend to invest in our future and increase revenue. This, to me, now more than ever, is where, if you're a Democrat, and I am, you got to lean into this. Because the Republicans, at least the ones who are currently in office, have walked away from this totally. The era of fiscal responsibility, from their vantage point, as far as I can see it, is over. It's gone. And I believe in it. And I think it's important that we have a balanced budget. I think it's important that we invest smartly for our children's sake and make sure that we actually have a country that we know has a way forward economically instead of just throwing money out the window. Yes.
All right, first of all, I think you're really on to something about fiscal responsibility, Mike. I vote Democratic every time. My son knows that, but he's an independent. And the two issues that matter to him the most are climate and fiscal responsibility. He's a banker. He notices what's happening, and it's very dangerous for our children and grandchildren.
Absolutely.
But I'd like to speak something about the veterans again, if you don't mind.
Don't mind at all.
Our church does a veterans breakfast and a veterans picnic. We'd like to be part of the solution. I think there are lots of churches who would like to be part of the solution as well. so far, we've only had the old guys that are from like the Vietnam era. And we really try to give you the best breakfast in Columbia County. That's our goal, okay, so, but the thing is, we would also like to be able to reach out to the younger guys, and we don't know how to do that, because we know we've heard that many of them, we've heard the high level of suicide rate that just breaks our heart, and we've also heard that they have trouble adjusting back. We'd like to be part of that solution. They're our neighbors. We want to be able to help, and we don't know how to contact them. You have a Veterans Advisory Committee. Maybe they could work on that and reach out to all the different churches.
I like that idea a lot, and I think we should. We should make sure we connect with Amanda, and we'll get you information. And I think that's a great idea to figure out how to use or work with, local institutions, the bedrock of communities, churches, synagogues, everybody. How do we bring people together in a way? I really appreciate that insight. Thank you so much. Yes, sir.
I have a question that's fairly polarizing, right? So,
what is it?
Around the issue of law enforcement reform.
Yes.
So the dynamic that certain individuals have with law enforcement is different depending on what demographic you fall into and things like that. Can you tell me how you plan to address this unbalanced system that seems to plague a lot of the youth in our society?
Yeah, absolutely. So the question was about the racial disparity issues that plague our current criminal justice system. We did just recently have the bipartisan crime bill that passed. There's some good stuff in there, but a lot more work is needed. On a personal note, in my prior life, I did a lot of pro bono work around juvenile lifers, individuals who were caught up in the system when they were 13, 14, 15 years old, and thrust into jail for being at the wrong place at the wrong time with mandatory life sentences as children. And it wasn't until a series of Supreme Court cases, I think 2012, that deemed that form of punishment cruel and unusual. And so we had the chance to relitigate those matters and seek resentencing. So I've been doing this work in that space, and I've seen the stories firsthand. And it's harsh. It's heartbreaking. As a father, raising two little boys, I'd be lying if I told you that I don't think about the kind of discussion I'm going to need to have with them as they come of age. To be smart, to be respectful, which I would have no matter what, but it carries a certain weight to it as an African American man, given the amount of unarmed occasions we have found too many black men on the wrong side of. So what can we do? Well, I think a couple things. As I alluded to earlier, racial bias training, I think, needs to be incorporated in our law enforcement. And it needs to come from the top down, the DOJ all the way down. Why is that so important? Because I think it's important to acknowledge that we have a legacy of racism in our country. It's real. And if you're an officer working and doing a dangerous job, this is a dangerous job. I have law enforcement in my family, close friends, one of whom actually was shot in line of duty and was paralyzed. Okay, so, and I know his kids, and I've seen that dynamic. So to understand how to make sure we empower officers to do and think right in those tense moments, we have to give them the skills and the tools to do that. When you are raised in a society where you are institutionalized to think of black as hostile, when you are confronted with it, you might not have the thinking or the time to think about it, act appropriately, unless you have training in that vein, unless there's a concerted systemic effort to deal with that. And that's just the goal just for white officers. That goes for black officers too, because we're all breathing the same air here. We're all taking in the same content, and it's all going to have the same effect. So that's a big one. Balancing on the force. Making sure that the communities who are doing the policing, or the individuals doing the policing reflect the individuals in the communities that they're doing the policing on. I think that could be helpful. Mandatory sentences, 3 strikes laws, gotta give judges more discretion. They need more discretion to account for some of the systemic inequities in our system that oftentimes fall along racial lines. Bail reform.
Yeah.
60-70% of folks locked up right now in New York are locked up because they can't afford bail. And they're not locked up for a violent crime. They're locked up for petty things. Drug possession. And now with the movement of marijuana legalization, to think about all those lives, all those families broken up for decades, thrown in jail because of distribution of marijuana. And now they got to look from within those bars at an emerging, booming, billion-dollar industry that is going to become white collar. Think about that. So if you think about the legalization of marijuana, what are we going to do to rectify that situation? That should be part of the conversation too. Those are a few things that I think we could be focusing on. I think you told me how to go soon, right? You got it. Okay, all right. Yes, sir.
I represent a family farm in the town of Germantown. That's one of the largest farms in southern Columbia County. We're directly affected by the trade difference with China, Canada, Mexico. I've never seen a mess like this in my life. I watched the Ag Report today. The bankruptcy in the Midwest went up 18%, and it's going to go up higher. We're farming in small land tracts here, but when you put our bread basket in jeopardy, if we can't feed the people in this country, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. And I watch every time, and I hate to put it that way because you see it on TV all the time, where the president says, okay, we just signed an agreement to trade 5 million tons of soybean per day to China. It was outright lie. More or less 5 million in a month.
Right.
It's just the stuff he came out with. But we're in balance right now with everything. And if you look, the ag economy was one of the best things we've had going for export as far as money in the country.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
And right now it's in a hell of a mess. I don't expect to drill you on anything today because you just got your feet wet.
Well, thank you, sir.
One thing I would say, one of the reasons why you're standing there, I had probably 8 or 10 people knock my door in your behalf. And I directly said to a lot of my friends, you got it right in your hands, and there's no way he's not going to win. I said, watch what's going on. You created a movement, okay? Now, we got to keep the movement going. Yes. And I don't expect you to solve any more of their problems, because I don't know, truthfully, how the hell you can stand to be in Washington the way it is.
I don't make it easy.
It's not easy, but this trade thing concerns us, and it concerns us big time on our farm. We have a lot of grain in storage right now, and the price is low because of what happened in the trade world with the tariffs and everything, with all the disputes that is going on in the world. We have another crop that we're going to start planting probably the end of the month, end of next month,
right. Beginning
of April, and it's making a big difference to us. It's costing us money.
Well, sir, the ag, I'm on the agriculture committee. Okay, I'm on 3 committees: infrastructure, small business, and agriculture. I chose those 3 because those 3 make up, in my essence, the defining aspects of this area. We ought to be the breadbasket. You speak a lot about the trade impact and the tariffs, and that is a symptom of a larger problem, in that we have tied so much of what goes on in the farming space to global markets and to macro mega farming at the expense of the vast majority of farmers that I know make up and live in this district, if that matter, the country, small, family-owned farms that need locally based distribution centers, that need locally based processing and marketing centers, that need real infrastructure, that need funding for programs like the local food promotion program or the farmers market program or the value add program. I've been doing a little homework on this, sir, and I can tell you, there are programs out there that are meant to empower small, family-oriented farms and do so in a way that no longer makes them marginalized for the betterment of the big boys and the mega farms and the corporate farms. So that's a big piece. The tariffs, if you're going to start dealing with some of the price manipulation and the stealing of intellectual property, which, yes, China's been doing, we got to figure out how to deal with that. But if you're going to do that work, you better do it in coordination with your allies. You better think about how to do it strategically in a fashion that actually moves the ball in a constructive way forward and not willy-nilly off the cuff. Not knowing exactly what the end game is going to be. You don't make a move without knowing where you're going. As a litigator, I can tell you, I never asked a question I didn't know the answer to. Okay? You ask questions you know answers to. You do things when you have a good sense of what the outcome might be and the effect might be. And right now we have a global trade policy that is not consistent with that mentality. It's just react and see what happens. See what happens. And farmers go bankrupt. That's what happens. We got to aid them. That's what happens. And we got to change that dynamic. So I hear you loud and clear. And I think we can do a lot of work in this district to be an example. Like I said, the third most rural district I'm serving as a Democrat in the country. New York, as a state, is the third most rural state. We have a lot of farmers in this district that can do a lot of work. Over 8,000 farm operations. We can do with the right investment. And then we got New York City, a couple hours down, unmet demand right now for local and organically grown food that we could be tapping into with real infrastructure. So I'm going to be an advocate. Absolutely.
Family farms don't want free government money. We want the farm to make their own money.
Yeah, exactly. You want investment. You want investment. Totally agree. Totally agree. Yes, sir.
Mr. Representative Delgado, on the topic of agriculture and seeing that you're on the agricultural committee, will you advocate for the farm laborers across the country which have no access to minimum wage rights, no federally guaranteed overtime pay, no federally guaranteed medical compensation, even though they're 40% more likely to be injured on the job than any other worker and 7 times more likely to die on the job than any other worker. 80,000 farm workers live in the state of New York and do not have any of these guaranteed rights. What are you doing to advocate for farm workers in America?
This is very important that we protect these rights, that we pursue these rights. The H-2A program, the temporary work programs, they need a lot of work. They need a lot of reform to make sure that we have individuals coming over here on a temporary basis doing that work, seasonal labor, that they are afforded the rights. Now, I talk to a lot of farmers in this district, and I can tell you that not every single farmer goes about the way you're talking about. But we should not have a system that operates on the assumption that every farmer is going to, function with an altruistic heart, right? I like to believe that we can't have that kind of system. So it is important that we do put measures in place to ensure basic level protections, basic level wages. And if we do that, we'll do right by our set of principles as a country. I'm with you 100% on that.
We need one more.
One more?
They're trying to screw up.
Oh, the Boy Scouts.
They're earning badges.
Earning badges? Oh boy. Citizenship badges. Here we go.
What can we do to help support you?
Wow. Well, first of all, I have to repeat the question. What can they do to help support me? First of all, you being here is enough. I tell you why. You give me a lot of hope. And you encourage me to keep doing what I do, and you inspire me. I got little boys. Okay, twin boys. Maxwell and Coltrane, they're 5 years old. They drive me a little wild. But every time I look at them, I see the future. And I look at you, I see the future. And it makes me all the more determined to fight. To fight. And to hopefully give you a sense of what's right and wrong. Right? And how we can work together, irrespective of our differences. And just be civil, and to care about each other, and to care about our community. How old are you guys? 12 and 13. So you're almost a teenager, you're almost there. So I just want you to keep staying engaged. Keep doing what you're doing. Have an open mind. Be open. Be kind-hearted. That's it. You do that?
Register to vote.
Register. They got a little time before they register. They're okay. Yes.
I register as 16 and 17-year-olds. In New York State law, and recent law, in 2020 I believe it is, they'll be able to pre-register to vote at age 16 and 17. That will become effective.
Pre-register to vote, 16 years old. Put it in your calendar.
To vote when they're 18. We get to pre-register.
Yes, I understand.
Just quickly.
Yes.
First, thank you for this. It's long overdue. We all appreciate that you're here face to face with us. Can you just touch on healthcare briefly?
Oh, yes.
Movement there?
So healthcare, to me that's the one of my number one priorities. It's something that I know a lot of folks are dealing with day in and day out, not just here at home, but across the country with skyrocketing premiums and deductibles. The president during the State of the Union, I was listening very intently for whatever his prescriptions might be, hoping to hear something to latch on to. He has some stuff in there about price transparency and price regulation. Okay, that's something. He has some stuff in there about reducing the price of drugs, but I was waiting to hear, making sure that Medicare has negotiating power with Big Pharma. I haven't heard that yet. The president actually ran on that. He said that Medicare should be able to have negotiating power. So there should be some common ground there, and that's why I am a co-sponsor of a bill that actually seeks that out. So I'm working to get that done. I've long talked about the need to make sure that Medicare is made available to everybody. And what does that mean? That means giving everybody under the sun the option to choose Medicare. Right now, we have a system that is completely owned by the private insurance system. And you don't have a choice unless you qualify for Medicare, unless you qualify for Medicaid, to be beholden to the profit motive of the private insurance space. I would suggest that we can do a lot of good if we actually insert into that private marketplace a public competitor and create a floor. And say, okay, private insurance marketplace, a new person is in town, new competitors in town, with the full faith and credit of the government. You better believe those premiums and deductibles in the face of that public competitor will go down considerably. Not talking about doing away with the whole private insurance marketplace, but what I am talking about is making sure that marketplace now has to be incredibly mindful of all of our ability to opt in to Medicare. Now, what does that do as well for small business owners and employees of small business owners? Small business owners no longer have to worry about being on the hook. They can put their employees to the public option. Employees no longer have to worry about being beholden to employer-based insurance and be feared about, oh my goodness, I can't go anywhere else because I'm not going to get quality care. Well, if you can opt into Medicare, you can. So it creates the kind of freedom we want in our system as well. I think we can get there. We're only one vote away back when the ACA was passed. So I think that would be a bold change to dealing with 1/6 of our overall economy.
Yep. Wow.
I could be here all day, but we have other places to go, I guess. So, so I'm gonna take one more question, and the woman right down the middle here.
So I was listening to everything. I'm going to admit it. I didn't vote for you, so.
I like that. Thank you for coming.
To hear what you were about and stuff, because I kind of want to reconcile with, the fact that we are a community here. It's a small community, at least in Columbia County, which is where I reside. And I think it's high time that we stop dividing along party lines to come together as a community. And, for instance, I'm 100% happy that you didn't sign on to the Green New Deal, because I think it's a publicity piece for the people that actually are promoting it. But in listening to you talk about the Medicare for All, while it sounds like a really great option or the ability to, how do you reconcile that with, earlier you were speaking with the gentleman that was to my right about reducing the debt. To me, that would increase our spending, which would thereby increase our debt.
Yes. So I want to be clear about something. And maybe I wasn't clear enough, so it's on me. Public option is not the same as Medicare for All. Medicare for All is a system that is paid for, as you point out, or you point out, but it's implied in your statement. We all got to pay taxes somehow, right? We got to raise revenue to pay it, right? And it is a system that is essentially a single-payer system that no longer has a private insurance marketplace. What I'm talking about is a public option, which gives people the choice to opt into Medicare. A buy-in, just like you would buy your insurance, right? You can buy into Medicare. We can talk about how we make it affordable, how we define affordability, subsidies in that vein, all of that. But the point I'm making is the current healthcare system, if you don't qualify for Medicaid, you don't qualify for Medicare, everybody else is on employer-based insurance and has to reconcile with a private insurance marketplace that is incredibly profit motive driven. And that explains in part why the premiums are skyrocketing so high, deductibles are where they are, and why there was a period of time in which the private insurance marketplace landed on a world in which people did not have guaranteed protections for pre-existing conditions. Because the profit motive doesn't always come with conscience. You see what I'm saying? So when you introduce a public competitor, when you introduce the option, when you say, how's it paid for? Well, it pays for itself. Medicare claims are administered at 7 times less of a rate than a private insurance claim. You know why? Well, not as many middle folk in the middle there, getting a little piece of the action, right? So you start streamlining the process, and you now also diversify the pool. The pool initially is a pretty high-risk pool. But if you give young people, everybody the option to opt in, then those costs, those premiums will all drive down. And it begins to pay for itself. In a way that right now, it's not. We're paying significantly more for significantly less relative to the rest of the world. This is the world. Does that make sense?
I guess in some ways, I'm just, for a doctor or nurses, someone, what's in it for them to stay doing what they're doing if they're being reduced in what they're getting paid?
Well, one, I would say doctors and nurses are still going to be paid.
Right, but I'm just saying Medicare is generally speaking, I don't do, I haven't dealt with this for my mom, but generally speaking, they pay out less in my experience.
Yes, so here's the thing. That's a great point. So the question, the point is, well, what about potential flight from providers? Because the reimbursement costs aren't the same, or they might be a little bit less than what you get on the private insurance marketplace. A couple of things. One, part of the reason why those reimbursement costs aren't the same is because the private insurance marketplace is out of whack. And so it's creating a disparity that is more illusory than actually is the case, right? So once you actually put some competition in the mix, that disparity won't be as grotesque as it appears to be. Then you talk about also maybe dealing with that reimbursement piece to a certain extent. That can help. Then lastly, though, this is a very important piece. The Medicare pool, you talk to any provider, hospital, doctor, nurse, and you say, okay, walk away from that whole pool. Just go deal with the folks who are on private insurance. Don't deal with anybody, because you don't want those low reimbursements. Don't deal with them. How many do you think are going to walk away from that guaranteed significant pool of individuals? Not very many. So while your point is well taken, you know, you got a trade-off here. You got a guaranteed pool of folks, high-risk pool, that you're going to constantly get your reimbursed for, versus hoping to get something more in the private insurance marketplace.
Well, could you insert some regulation into
Yeah, I think we talked about that. I think price, visibility, price, you know, with price gouging, making sure that we do a lot around the pricing is important. But the fact is, absent some sort of bold step that actually puts more pressure on this notion that our healthcare can essentially be taken care of almost entirely within a private insurance marketplace, when the marketplace itself operates on the premise of profitability, it tests the limits of, you know, what's fair and right when it comes to our health and well-being. And so in that thing, I think creating that option gets us there. All right. You know, I'm going to wrap it up. I just want to say, I really, as we bring this to a close, I really want to say thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate the questions, the time, the commitment. It means a lot. It really means a lot, and I just hope that we continue to keep building. And we have index cards in the back. You can fill them out. If you get a question, we'll happily follow up with you. I really appreciate it.